My name is Hannah Brady, and I will be reading excerpts from Fall and Rise, The Story of 9/11 by Mitchell Zukoff. Betty, how are you holding up, honey? Gonzalez asked. Okay, you're gonna be fine. Relax, honey. Betty. Several times, Betty reported that the plane was flying erratically, almost turning sideways. Please pray for us, Betty asked. Oh God. Even as his anxiety rose about American Flight 11, Boston Center Air Traffic Controller Peter Zalewski knew nothing about Betty Ong's anguished, ongoing call. No one from American Airlines Fort Worth Operations Control Headquarters relayed information to the FAA's command center in Herndon, Virginia, to FAA's headquarters in Washington, or to anyone else. As minutes passed, and Commandeered Flight 11 flew west across Massachusetts and over New York, communications among the airline, the FAA, and U.S. military officials were sporadic at best, incomplete or non-existent at worst. For 11 minutes, an unusually long time, Peter Zalewski had no contact with Flight 11. Then, at 8:24 a.m., 5 minutes after the start of Betty Ong's call to American Airlines Reservation Center, Zalewski heard 3 strange clicks on the radio frequency assigned to Flight 11 and numerous other flights in his sector. Is that American 11 trying to call? Zalewski asked. Then, Zalewski heard an unknown male voice with a vaguely Middle Eastern accent. The unknown man's radio message wasn't clear, and Zalewski didn't comprehend it. Unknown at that point to anyone at Boston Center, the foreign-sounding man, almost spitting his words directly into the microphone, had said, "We have some blitz. Just stay quiet and we'll be okay. We are returning to the airport." The comment sounded like a message from the cockpit intended to pacify Flight 11's passengers and crew, none of whom heard it. The person in the pilot seat, almost certainly Mohammed Atta, keyed the mic in a way that transmitted the message to the air traffic control on the ground, as well as other planes using the same frequency, and not to the passengers and crew in the cabin behind it. Zalewski answered, "And, who was trying to call me here? American 11, are you trying to call?" Seconds later, Zalewski heard another communication from the cockpit, also apparently intended for the passengers and crew of Flight 11. "Nobody move. Everything will be okay. If you try to make any moves, you will injure yourselves and the airplane. Just stay quiet." Zalewski screamed for his supervisor, John Chapini. "John, get over here, right now!" As Flight 11 flew erratically through the sky, Flight Attendant Amy Sweeney sat in a rear jump seat next to Betty Ong and called the American Airlines flight services in Boston with horrific news. Michael took over the call. "Amy, sweetie, what's going on?" he asked in a tightly controlled voice. Amy answered, "Listen to me very, very carefully." Michael grabbed a pad of paper to take notes. After the last routine contact between pilots John Ogonowski and Tom McGinnis and Boston Center's Peter Zalewski at 8:13 a.m., Atta and his men pounced. Based on the timing, about 15 minutes into the flight, they might have used a predetermined signal. When the pilots turned off the fasten seatbelt signs, one or more of the hijackers sprayed mace or pepper spray to create confusion and force passengers and flight attendants away from the cockpit doors. Using weapons smuggled aboard, they stabbed or slashed first-class flight attendants Karen Martin and Bobby Aristugi. All 9 flight attendants had keys to the cockpit, but it's not clear how the hijackers gained entry. Atta and his crew might have attacked Karen and Bobby to steal their keys, or the hijackers might have gotten into the cockpit another way. In fact, the cockpit doors were relatively flimsy and weren't strong enough to prevent forced entry. Another possibility was that the hijackers stabbed first-class flight attendants to induce the pilots to open the cockpit door. Or maybe it was even simpler. In 2001, one key opened the cockpit doors of all Boeing planes. Maybe the hijacker brought the key with them. Amy told Michael Woodward that the 3 hijackers in business class were Middle Eastern and gave him their seat numbers, key pieces of evidence to identify the terrorist. Betty identified the seat numbers of the 2 hijackers in first class. Amy told Michael she saw one of the hijackers with a device with red and yellow wires that appeared to be a bomb. He wrote "cockpit bomb" on his notepad. Betty didn't mention a bomb, and no one knew whether what Amy saw was real or a decoy. On their separate calls, the 2 flight attendants said they didn't know whether coach passengers fully understood the peril. Amy told Michael that she believed the coach passengers thought the problem was a routine medical emergency in the front section of the plane. At 8:29 a.m., a half an hour after takeoff, American Flight 11 turned south-southeast, putting it more directly en route to Manhattan. The 767 climbed to 30,400 feet. 2 minutes after adjusting course, it descended to 29,000. 1 second before 8:34 a.m., air traffic controllers at Boston Center heard a third disturbing transmission from the cockpit, a lie apparently intended to pacify passengers and crew, but never heard by them. "Nobody move, please. We are going back to the airport. Don't try to make any stupid moves." Controllers at Boston Center fell silent. Then, they decided to do something. FAA air traffic control managers called in the military. At the very least, the military might have better luck tracking the hijacked plane. Some Boston Center controllers knew that the military had a radar that could possibly reveal the plane's altitude even when the transponder turned off. Betty and Amy relayed all the information they could as quickly and completely as they could for as long as they could. At 8:43 a.m., roughly a half an hour after the hijacking began, Flight 11 changed course again to the south-southwest. The move put the Boeing 767, still heavy with fuel, on a direct course for Lower Manhattan, the heart of America's financial community. At the American Airlines Center in Fort Worth, Nydia Gonzalez begged for information. "What's going on, Betty? Betty, talk to me. Betty, are you there? Betty?" Betty didn't answer.